For those who are unfamiliar with spirit science, one of the most popular videos that we have for all of time has been this movie called the Human History Movie. And it's a story about the fall of Atlantis. And it basically describes that, like, at one point we existed as this, Atlantean species, and exploring kind of this higher dimensional, here I'll kind of draw this sort of path of our collective soul. Now, there's sort of we kind of left it blank at the beginning. We were kind of like, there's stuff that happens before this, but we're not going to cover it right now. But like the story sort of takes place with Atlantis, and we were going along in our evolution, and something happened. There was people or beings who came to our planet who had taken what is called the path of the Lucifer experiment, which basically just means separating yourself from source, becoming disconnected from spirit and living entirely logically with no compassion or love, and in that kind of succumbing to selfishness and cruelty even. And so they actually destroyed their homeworld, which in the story, it's very interesting. It says that it was Mars. And it said that Mars used to be a fully inhabitable planet, just like this one. But these beings kind of took all the resources similar to what we're doing today and got into this huge war with each other, and they blew off the atmosphere of the planet. They destroyed the planet, and it became this red rock floating through space. But the beings didn't want to just die, so they came to our planet and made a home for themselves on Atlantis. And when they moved in, the Martians ended up causing like this whole mess of a shift. And what happened was that the consciousness actually just plummeted. The whole civilization fell. That dropped us to what could be described as the lowest possible place we could exist and still live and have bodies. And so
into the reptilian survival mind.
Fully into that, yeah, the back brain, like the higher parts of the brain and the use of the brain as a full thing was very shut off. It was like these a bunch of people waking up on a planet with no memories or understanding of who they are, where they came from, what they are, what the story was. They just existed there and started they had to learn how to survive. So they became hunter-gatherers, they became, nomads and the different, tribal kind of lifestyle, caveman lifestyle, if you will, all kind of popped up. And this was 13,000 years ago at the time of the last ice age. And 6,000 years years of time goes by. So we'll just go 6K. And what happened was that there was a few individuals from Atlantis who were considered like the ascended masters. They were like the spiritual leaders. They had achieved a much higher, like the highest level of consciousness of all of the Atlanteans. And they had a technology that allowed them to retain their memories and their higher consciousness through the shift. So these were like these ascended sort of super beings a little bit compared to the humans that were down here. And 6,000 years after all that period, these beings appeared to the little groups of tribes starting in Mesopotamia and gave them information on how to create a civilization. And so there's this thing in history called a stair-step evolution, which scientists can't really explain, but the story does a pretty good job of it, which says that looking at how Sumerian civilization works, it was like all of a sudden, within a single day, the whole civilization was founded, and they had buildings and they had the basis of a working civilized system. But then like a few hundred years later, all of a sudden they're masters of like hydraulics and moat systems and waterways and, like running water throughout the cities and stuff like that. And then another few hundred years later, suddenly they're the masters of all of these other things, like the wheel is invented, this is invented, all these amazing inventions and information, all of a sudden they just they just evolve very rapidly. And of course, scientists today, geologists, historians, they don't understand how that's possible, but the story kind of explains that it was just given, the information was just given to them by these people who understood, a lot more than they did. This happened in a few places around the world. It happened in Egypt, and it happened in Mesoamerica, and it happened, I believe, in China. It started facilitating the re-emergence of consciousness for humanity. And one of the struggles with this whole thing is the way that the timeline and the fall and everything happened is they only had like one big cycle to complete this transformation relating with the precession of the equinox and the movement of the planet around the sun in the particular, just like cycles of time. And so they only had 13,000 years to go from where they were to return to this higher level, or else we would destroy ourselves. Like we would become too chaotic. We have to reach this higher level now, and that's right now, that's happening. And so over the next 4,000 years, civilization continues to grow. You have the ancient Egyptian culture actually gave birth to the ancient Greek culture, which took a lot of information and transformed it into a beautiful philosophy and wisdom teachings about love and stuff. The writings of Plato actually seeded a lot of information for Christianity, and there was also a split that happened in Egypt where there was this leader named Akhenaten, who was this is a part of the movie as well, the human history movie. It was interesting because he was said to be incredibly tall, like 16 feet tall sort of thing, and at least that's how he's always depicted. And that he tried to create a unified understanding of God. He tried to erase the Egyptian pantheon of deities that had become misunderstood over time, and reestablish a singular unified understanding of God. And the Egyptians ultimately ended up revolting after 16 years or something like that. Akhenaten was supposedly killed, and Egypt went back to its old way. But right in that time is when the Hebrew, the Jewish tradition actually emerged. And so that was sort of like the birth of the Exodus, and taking that unified monotheistic pathway and establishing like another tradition off of the thing. So then when Egypt evolved into Greece and the Hebrew path went on its own way, eventually they all came together in a place called Alexandria. And that was again, about 2,000 years ago, where those two teachings fused together and created Christianity. And for the last 2,000 years, humanity's continued to be on its upward spiral, getting faster and faster, getting more and more information. And especially in the last 100, 150 years with the dawn of more modern technology, and now especially with the internet and everything like that, the freedom of information is just, we are skyrocketing with so much information that it's quantumly and very, you can't even absorb all of it, because everybody has access to and share everything that they could possibly know and learn with each other. And all of it sort of leading to this crescendo of recognizing this entire story, and then purging and healing all of the trauma from all of the stuff. And that's what the plant medicine is really doing, right? It's we're healing all of this stuff to return to a level where by the power of our hearts, we can actually once again return to this original or higher consciousness. So what Elaine was saying too is we should watch the Sumerian epic trailer, and what that's about is basically this was a movie that was made in 2011. And the entire thing starts with there's a bunch of stuff that happened and we're not going to talk about it. Here's Atlantis and everything else. And this movie we're making, it's going to be 9 parts long. It's basically answering that question. So it looks at the story of the original Sumerian civilization, what they believed, what their tablets say, and how everything came about that brought us to the Atlanteans, but also answering a couple other questions of the Great Flood. Because this fall that took place also is the coinciding mark of the Great Flood in the Old Testament. There's so many flood stories around the world. The theme and the information I keep seeing and getting is that what happened was that 13,000 years ago, all the ice caps melted, and it created a wave that washed over the entire ocean and destroyed everything. That's why you hear stories about the fall of Atlantis being so this destructive cataclysm with giant waves washing over, destroying everything. It's because that actually happened as a physical thing that took, created a new era for this planet. And we're just still figuring out all the pieces of how that works right now. But there's some people who suggest that that's going to happen again. I mean, looking at global warming and the melting of all the ice caps, if it just one blast of radiation from the sun in a direct line, especially, or the slower process that we're going now, would create another big wave. And we just have to be prepared for it. We have to understand what's coming.
I mean, they had said too, like in that fall, the ones who were able to kind of avoid that were those who had their energetic fields and their Merkabahs turned on. And so like that's your protection in a way of, doesn't really matter what's going through the world. If you realize yourself as a spiritual being and your identity is attached more to you on a cosmic sense beyond your body, then to be able to elevate yourself to a point where, you know, the world could be going through its own shifts and waves and transformations, but you're able to still hold your own resonance and to come back down when it's time and to, you know, start making shifts again. Like that's, you know, a very possible reality. But at the same time, I feel like as we increase our own vibration, it's very possible that we'll learn the lessons that we need to completely avoid this and go through a new heaven. And like from a biblical standpoint too, that they said that there wasn't going to be another flood. So like chances are like that experience has happened in a way that we don't have to do that again. But they did say the second flood will be fire. So.
The next flood will be fire, I was just going to say. So this is really fun. This is a little trailer that we made. Elaine did a lot of coloring for it, actually. Yeah. So, but hopefully you'll enjoy it.
The year is 1847. A young archaeologist named Austin Henry Layard was Indiana Jonesing his way around ancient Mesopotamian ruins, where he properly identified and henceforth discovered the ancient Assyrian city-state of Nineveh, in an area now known as Iraq. In an absolutely incredible discovery, he found 22,000 clay tablets hidden in the depths of the city. These tablets contained cuneiform, which today is one of, if not the earliest known writing systems known to man, created by the Sumerians 6,000 years ago. Over the years, more ancient historical cities were found and excavated. Many of the world's museums now count among their prize exhibits the ceremonial gates, winged bulls, chariots, tools, utensils, jewelry, statues, and other objects that have been dug out of the mounds that are Assyria and Babylon. But the true treasures of these kingdoms were their written records. The cuneiform tablets of Sumer contain inscriptions of a tremendous magnitude, encompassing cosmological tales, epic poems, histories of kings, temple records, and not least of all, texts dealing with the names, genealogies, epithets, deeds, powers, and duties of the gods, known as the Anunnaki. Today, there are several main interpretations about what the term gods actually meant to these ancient people. The most socially acceptable interpretation today is generally that these gods represent forces of nature or aspects of life. There are also specific times when the Sumerians make reference to planets or star constellations, who are also referred to as gods. One of the most controversial theories today is that these gods were actual beings like us, who played a part in the creation of humanity. The tablets describe how the gods created our species and explain the purpose behind our existence. This story was filtered throughout the epochs of mankind and eventually became an altered version and the most well-known creation story on our planet to date. But the question is, what does this story truly mean, and how does it impact us today? Is there any validity to the ideas of the Anunnaki and the planet Nibiru?